Welcome to the Explainer. Look, today we're injecting some serious high-octane fun into your chess games. If you've ever wanted to figure out how to completely swindle your opponents, snag a massive early advantage, and just bring some heavy firepower to the board, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to break down the absolute best ways to catch your opponent totally off guard right out of the opening gates.
Before we get to the board, let's just think about the literal definition of our topic for a second. The word gambit actually comes from the Italian word gambetto, which literally translates to sticking one's leg out or tripping someone up. And honestly, that perfectly illustrates what we're doing today. These openings are explicitly designed to craftily trip up your opponent by offering them free material in exchange for a deadly attack. So, to make sure you walk away with a structured hustler's playbook, we're going to follow this exact roadmap. First, the art of sacrifice. Second, unleashing the Danish gambit. Third, the Evans gambit attack. Fourth, Black's Budapest surprise. And finally, some lethal essential traps.
All right, let's start with section 1, the art of sacrifice.
Willingly giving up your hard-earned material can feel totally unnatural. But when you play a gambit, you aren't just throwing a piece away. You're making a brilliant, aggressive investment in time, space, and development. The really crucial point here is understanding the difference between a sound gambit and a dubious trap. A sound gambit gives you lasting positional compensation. Even if your opponent plays perfectly, you still have a great game. A dubious trap, on the other hand, highly venomous. You play it hoping they make a mistake. But if they actually know the theory, you could be left struggling in a very risky position. You need both in your arsenal, for sure, but you really have to know when to use them.
Okay, let's move right into section 2, unleashing the Danish gambit. This is a ridiculously fast, energetic weapon for white, where you're actually sacrificing up to 2 pawns right in the center of the board. It kicks off with e4, e5, then d4, xd4. But here's the kicker. Instead of recapturing the pawn, white just plays c3. You're basically ignoring the captured pawn and offering up yet another one. The whole goal is to rapidly blast open the lines for your bishops, so they can absolutely steamroll the opponent's kingside. And listen, if Black doesn't know exactly how to defend against this immense pressure, things get really ugly really fast. In fact, in one of the source games we looked at from a live stream, White delivered a devastating checkmate in literally just 14 moves. The white e-pawn literally marched the entire distance of the board to deliver a discovered check and promote to a queen. 14 moves. That is the lethal power of the Danish. Next up, section 3, the Evans gambit attack. Now, unlike the Danish, the Evans is a completely sound classical sacrifice. Actually, fun fact, it was invented by a Welsh naval captain, Captain William Davies Evans, who also invented tricolored ship lighting to prevent collisions at sea. But there's absolutely nothing safe about what this opening does to Black. After a standard Italian game setup, White unleashes this shocking b4 pawn push. It's designed entirely to deflect Black's dark-squared bishop away from its ideal square, buying White time to take over the center with c3 and d4, just building this massive wall of pawns. Now, you might be wondering, is this actually good at a high level? Well, it's so potent that modern chess engines totally back it. Even the legendary world champion Bobby Fischer played it almost exclusively in the mid-1960s and boasted a staggering 70% win rate with it. I mean, if it's good enough to crush grandmasters and win 70% of the time for a world champion, it is definitely good enough for your next game. Let's flip the board now for section 4, Black's Budapest surprise.
If you're the type of player who hates facing those slow, methodical queen's pawn openings, you are going to love this aggressive weapon. As soon as White plays d4 and c4, Black instantly strikes back in the center by sacrificing the e5 pawn. You're giving up material on move 2 just to get rapid piece development. By tossing that pawn, Black brings their knight to incredibly tricky active squares like g4 or e4, instantly putting White on the defensive.
And this brilliantly illustrates the danger for White. In the Budapest, if White just plays natural, totally normal-looking developing moves to try and hold onto that extra pawn, they can easily fall into a catastrophic trap. There are variations where Black's knights and bishops coordinate so beautifully that they completely lock in and capture White's queen right on the queen side of the board. Literally one tiny slip by White, and the game is over before move 10. And that brings us to our final section, lethal essential traps.
Okay, we are officially leaving the realm of fundamentally sound chess and diving into the objectively dubious but absolutely lethal traps you just gotta have in your Blitz and Bullet toolkit. Because when that clock is ticking fast, chaos is your best friend. For example, let's imagine a scenario in the Scotch game. Normally, white recaptures a central pawn on move 4, but what happens if white completely ignores the pawn and just hurls a knight straight into black's territory?
Right, so this is the wild horse variation. White plays knight to g5. The entire aim here is to sacrifice that knight immediately on f7, ripping open black's king side and dragging the black king, kicking and screaming right out into the center of the board, where it can just be hunted down by the queen and bishop.
Objectively, sure, it sounds completely crazy, but in practical, fast-paced games, the stats don't lie. This aggressive, high-risk variation has a massive 73% win rate for white against black's most common replies. Black is forced to find extremely precise defensive moves under intense time pressure, and honestly, most players just collapse.
But hey, black has their own dirty tricks too. So how can black punish white for making moves that look totally standard and safe? The answer is the Stafford Gambit. This is an opening that willingly gives up a central pawn and happily accepts doubled, ugly pawns, all just to set up a massive swindle against an unsuspecting opponent.
The Stafford is essentially a giant explosive minefield for white. The arsenal here is legendary. We're talking terrifying traps like the famous "oh no, my queen sacrifices," where giving up your queen leads to a forced mate, or traps that drag white's king all the way out to the e4 square before move 10. The absolute beauty of the Stafford is that it exploits white's natural developing moves. If white plays on autopilot, they're going to lose a rook, a queen, or just get checkmated immediately. Now, before you go sacrificing all your pieces in your next tournament, you definitely need to proceed with caution. Remember that distinction we made at the very beginning? Dubious gambits like the wild horse or the Stafford can be refuted. If your opponent is well prepared, knows the theory, and stays calm, they can completely diffuse these traps, keep their extra material, and leave you struggling in a much worse position. High risk means high reward, but the risk is very, very real.
So, we've covered the psychology of the sacrifice, the sheer power of the Danish and Evans gambits, the counter-striking Budapest, and some seriously venomous traps for fast time controls. Now that you're armed with this playbook of sacrifices and swindles, I've got one question for you. Which of these lethal gambits are you going to unleash on the board first? Are you going to play it safe, or are you ready to stick your leg out and trip up your next opponent? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and happy hunting on the chessboard.